Hi guys, my name is Thijs and today I will be presenting you with my experiences with assessment, my vision on assessment and the tool I designed for my students. Well, my experience with assessment. As a pupil at school, I always received like the same type of assessment, mostly written tests or sometimes a presentation, but almost always summative and always like AOL, so assessments of learning, so really performance based. Some of the teachers used diagnostic tests, but those were the only forms of formative testing that was used at my school. So that type of testing is called AFL, Assessment for Learning. Um, as a result, I became mostly focused on grades and not on my learning. And I gradually developed myself as a member of the zesjescultuur. And this means I was always focused on getting like a pass, like a 6 or maybe even a 5.5. As a result, also I struggled with testing as a student on like the after my secondary school. I almost reset every exam I ever took, and it also became like a kind of fear of failure type of thing. The power of yet would have really helped me. Would have really helped me very much. So then, when you look at the continuous formative assessment of CLIL, the assessment that I've received was planned, but it wasn't reactive and it wasn't reciprocal, and there was always a very clear line between instructions and assessment, and it never faded. Also, I've been hit with a very bad case of hay fever, so that's why I maybe sound a little strange. Okay, then my experiences with assessment as a teacher. I always start my lesson with presenting learning goals clearly, and I always end my lesson with checking these goals. These are important parts of assessment for learning in the classroom. As a teacher, I began making my own tests. In the beginning, I always struggled with implementing the different levels of the Bloom taxonomy. That didn't really come naturally to me, so I really had to work on that. And as of now, I'm better at it, but it's still a challenge. Also, I gradually started using different types of questions and different types of sources like pictures or maps or newspaper articles, things like that, to make the test a little bit more lively. This last year has been very interesting. The school I teach at, the Marcanti College in the west of Amsterdam, it's scrapped grading for the first and second year students. The first and second year students don't get grades at all, but they are assessed by rubrics. At the beginning of a new semester or period, they get a rubric. The rubrics are filled with the content and also the learning goals. With this rubric, before they start with the new content, they fill in where they think they are on that rubric, and at the end of the period or semester or whatever, they get the same rubric again, and they have to fill in where they think they are now. So that makes the learning visible, and also they also get a filled in rubric by the teacher. So it makes for a more like visible learning experience. But the rubrics on that school are still like in a type of developing stage. So I would have waited on implementing this whole not grading system, because it feels to me like the system is not yet fully formed, and this creates a lot of confusion for the kids, because not all teachers are using the rubrics for the same. They're not using it in the same way, so sometimes it gets confusing for the children. But I'm really behind this form of assessing. So this flows into my vision on assessment. I think we should forget grades up until a point. I think the secondary school, it needs to have some type of point where the kids are graded with a mark, because I think there needs to be at least one moment where the children like definitely pass or fail. Like that's important for the children's development as well. But before that period, I think it is useful to use a grading system which uses rubrics instead of 1, 2, 3, or 5, 6, 10, because yeah, it makes the students more focused on grades instead of focusing on learning. And I've seen a couple of my pupils on the Marcanti College that really benefited of this system, that started in like the low end of the rubric, that really ended in the high end of the rubric in a span of 1 year. So they really developed themselves, and they also really shown that that they are responsible for their own learning. So I think it's a beautiful system. On the language side of assessment, I think pupils need to be assessed on their language, but I think the first 2 years their language should be assessed by the teacher, but not yet implemented in the grade. So they should be able to make mistakes at first, but then after a while, like 2 or 3 years, the language should become part of the grading. Because that was also the way my teachers used the language part of the CLIL environment. Because I was part of the bilingual stream on my secondary school, and this worked really well. And I always, it really showed me that it creates a really good learning environment. Just to be safe at first, and then after that it becomes a little more serious. Okay, so then the tool I designed for the formative assessment is a well-known tool. It's called Muddiest Point. In the Muddiest Point tool, you ask the children, or you ask the pupils, what was the muddiest point of this lecture or this lesson? And then they write down what they think was the most unclear, or something that they thought wasn't explained well enough. This makes the learning visible. Even kijken. Oh yeah, I always implement this in my lessons at the Marcanti, because after I discuss the learning goals at the beginning of the lessons, I always give all my pupils a post-it, and they're supposed to write down something that needs to be elaborated on. So this always makes it is reactive, because it makes the last 10 minutes of my lesson always an open part of the lesson. Because if most of the children want more explanation about a subject, then I'm gonna talk about this subject in the last 10 minutes. But if they don't, then I will change the last 10 minutes of the lesson as well. So it's really reactive. Also, so I already said, it makes the learning of the pupils visible, because after a couple of lessons with the same type of content, you can, if you repeat, how do you say this? If you at the end of the content lessons, you get back at all the different types of content, and you can see how this, if the pupils learned from their muddiest point. So did the muddiest point become clear at the end of the lesson, how do you say this, lesson series, or not? Okay. Also, it's really reciprocal, because it also gives me insight on my own teaching. Okay, so that was my vlog. Thank you for listening.